The villagers had warned Ngozi not to marry Kelechi, the strange man who lived on the outskirts of the town. "He's cursed," they said. "He'll bring you bad luck." But Ngozi didn't listen. She loved him, even though no one knew much about him. It wasn't until the wedding night, when she heard the strange scratching sounds coming from under the bed, that she began to wonder if she had made a terrible mistake. Ngozi was kind, hardworking young lady from a humble family. She grew up in a small bustling African village, where status meant everything. Marrying into a wealthy or influential family was every girl's dream. But Ngozi had never cared much for riches. She wanted love, and she found it in Kelechi. Kelechi was different from the other men in the village. He was quiet, reserved, and lived alone in a rundown hut near the forest. Most villagers avoided him, claiming he was unlucky. "He has no family, no money, and no future," they whispered. But Ngozi saw something in him that no one else did. He was kind, thoughtful, and had a gentle spirit. When Kelechi asked her to marry him, she said yes without hesitation, even though her family and friends disapproved. The days leading up to Ngozi's wedding were tense and filled with tears. Her family and friends were furious when she announced her decision to marry Kelechi. Her mother, Mama Adeobi, was the first to voice her disapproval. "Ngozi, have you completely lost your mind? You're throwing your future away for a man with nothing. Nothing. How can you build a life with someone who can't even feed himself properly?" Ngozi's younger brother, Chinedu, shaking his head in frustration. "Kelechi is a nobody, Ngozi. He doesn't even have a proper house. You'll end up suffering, and when you come crying back home, don't expect us to welcome you with open arms." Her best friend, Kemi, was equally harsh. "Ngozi, I love you, but this is the worst decision you've ever made. You're beautiful, smart, and hardworking. You could marry someone from the city, someone with a real future. But Kelechi? The man is practically invisible in this village. No one even knows where he came from." Ngozi felt like she was standing alone against a storm. She tried to explain, her voice shaking with emotion. "Kelechi may not have money, but he has a good heart. He loves me for who I am, not for what I can bring him. Isn't that what matters most?" Mama Adeobi's face softened for a moment, but her tone was still sharp. "A good heart won't pay the bills, Ngozi. Love is sweet, but it can quickly turn bitter when there's no food on the table." Ngozi's father, Papa Okafor Agbona, remained silent for most of the argument, but when he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with disappointment. "If you marry this man, Ngozi, don't expect us to support you. You're making your bed, you'll lie in it alone." Ngozi fought back tears. She didn't understand why they couldn't see what she saw in Kelechi. He was kind, patient, and hardworking. He might not have wealth, but he had dignity and a quiet strength that she admired. When the day of the wedding arrived, it was bittersweet. Ngozi had hoped her family would change their minds, but they didn't. The small church where the ceremony was held felt emptier without their presence. Kelechi noticed her sadness as they stood together at the altar. He leaned in and whispered, "Are you sure you want to do this? I don't want to be the reason you lose your family." Ngozi looked into his eyes and saw the sincerity of his love. "I'm sure," she said firmly. "This is my choice, Kelechi. They'll come around eventually." But deep down, she wasn't so sure. Outside the church, a few villagers gathered to gossip. "Did you hear? Ngozi's family refused to come," one woman said, shaking her head. "I don't blame them. This marriage is a mistake." "Poor girl," another added. "She's throwing her life away for a man who can't even afford to give her a proper wedding dress." Ngozi ignored the whispers, focusing instead on Kelechi's warm smile as he slipped the simple silver band onto her finger. The ceremony was short but heartfelt. When the priest pronounced them husband and wife, Kelechi held her hand tightly, as if promising to never let her go. Later that evening, as they walked back to Kelechi's modest home, Ngozi couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness. She had always imagined her wedding day surrounded by love and laughter, with her family cheering her on. Instead, she had chosen a lonely path, but it was a path she believed in, with all her heart. "Are you happy?" Kelechi asked as they reached the door. Ngozi smiled, though tears glistened in her eyes. "I'm with you, Kelechi. That's all that matters." In that moment, she believed her love for Kelechi was enough to conquer any obstacle. Little did she know, their journey was only beginning. And the sacrifices she had made would soon pale in comparison to the challenges ahead. The wedding was small and simple, just as Kelechi wanted. That night, as Ngozi settled into Kelechi's modest home, she noticed something strange. There was an old wooden box in the corner of the room, locked tight with a rusted padlock. "What's in the box?" she asked Kelechi. He hesitated for a moment before replying, "It's nothing important. Just old things from my past. Don't worry about it." But Ngozi couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the box than he was letting on. Later that night, as they lay in bed, Ngozi heard scratching sounds coming from under the bed. It was faint at first but grew louder and more persistent. "Kelechi, do you hear that?" she whispered, her heart pounding. Kelechi sat up, listening. Then, without a word, he got out of bed and walked to the box. He opened it with a key he kept around his neck and pulled out a large, worn journal. "What are you doing?" Ngozi asked, confused and frightened. "It's time you knew the truth," he said, his voice calm but serious. Ngozi sat on the edge of the bed, her heart pounding as she watched Kelechi unlock the mysterious box. His hands trembled slightly as he lifted the lid, revealing a collection of old photographs, faded documents, and a large, worn journal. "You deserve to know the truth," Kelechi began, his voice low but steady. He pulled out one of the photographs and handed it to Ngozi. It showed a young Kelechi standing beside a grand mansion, surrounded by well-dressed men and women. Ngozi stared at the picture, and she was confused. "What is this, Kelechi? Who are these people?" Ngozi asked. "They're my family," Kelechi replies, sitting down beside her. "Or at least, they used to be." She looked at him, her eyes wide. "You told me you didn't have any family." "I didn't lie," Kelechi said, his voice thick with emotion. "They disowned me. Or rather, they tried to erase me. Let me explain." Kelechi took a deep breath, as if gathering strength to relive painful memories. "I come from a wealthy family, Ngozi. My father was a powerful man, a billionaire with businesses across the country. When he passed away, he left everything to me, in his will. But my relatives, my uncles and my cousins didn't accept it. They thought the wealth should be theirs. I am the only surviving child of my parent, and my mother has passed away for long, before my father passed away." Ngozi's eyes filled with shock. "But why? You're his son." "Because I was young, and they thought I was too weak to handle the empire," Kelechi replied bitterly. "They said I didn't deserve it. At first, they tried to manipulate me into signing everything over to them. When I refused, they got desperate." Ngozi leaned closer, her heart aching for him. "What did they do?" "They sent men to kidnap me," Kelechi said, his voice breaking slightly. "I was coming home from a friend's house, one evening when a van pulled up beside me. Before I knew what was happening, they grabbed me and threw me inside the van. They blindfolded me and took me to an abandoned warehouse." Ngozi gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh my God, Kelechi. What happened next?" "They beat me," he said, his jaw tightening. "They wanted me to sign documents giving up my inheritance. But I refused. I thought they were going to kill me." Tears welled up in Ngozi's eyes. "How did you escape?" One of the kidnappers had a conscience, Kelechi said. He secretly untied me and told me to run. I barely made it out alive. I went into hiding, but my family wasn't done with me. They hired assassins to find me and finish the job. Ngozi's hands trembled as she clutched the photograph. Kelechi, this is too much. How have you survived all this? I've been living in the shadows, moving from place to place, he said. That's why I live so simply, why I never tell anyone about my past. It's the only way to stay safe. Ngozi's voice cracked as she asked, why didn't you tell me before? Why didn't you let me help you? I didn't want to drag you into this, Kelechi said, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. I love you, Ngozi. I didn't want you to look at me and see danger. I wanted you to see the man I am now, not the man they tried to destroy. Ngozi reached out and held his face in her hands. Kelechi, I don't care about your past or your family's money. I love you for who you are. But you can't fight this alone. We're married now. Your battles are my battles. Kelechi closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. You don't understand, Ngozi. These people are ruthless. They'll stop at nothing to get what they want. I've already lost so much. I can't lose you too. You won't lose me, she said fiercely. We'll face this together. But Kelechi, we can't keep running forever. You need to reclaim what is yours. It's the only way to stop them. For a long moment, Kelechi was silent, his emotions warring inside him. Finally, he nodded. You're right. It's time to stop hiding. But it won't be easy. If we're going to fight, we need to be ready for whatever comes. Ngozi tightened her grip on his hands. Then we'll fight. Together. At that moment, Kelechi realized he had married not just a wife but a partner, someone who would stand by him no matter the odds. The road ahead would be dangerous, but for the first time in years, he felt hope. Ngozi's heart raced. So, you're not cursed? She asked. No, Kelechi replied. But the people who are after me, they are dangerous. The next morning, Ngozi noticed strange men in the village. They were asking questions about Kelechi, pretending to be traitors. But their sharp eyes and weapons tucked under their robes told a different story. Kelechi knew they were his relatives' men, and they had finally tracked him down. We need to leave, he told Ngozi. But it was too late. That night, the men surrounded their home, banging on the doors and shouting threats. Kelechi had prepared for this day. He led Ngozi through a secret tunnel he had dug under the house, leading them into the dense forest. The men broke into the house, but by the time they realized Kelechi and Ngozi were gone, the couple was far away. They traveled for days, eventually reaching a safe house Kelechi had set up in another village. There, he revealed the full extent of his wealth. Hidden accounts, properties, and treasures were scattered across the country. Kelechi and Ngozi sat in their new hideout, a modest house deep in the countryside. The tension in the air was thick as they discussed their next move. Kelechi had been restless for days, pacing back and forth, lost in thought. Ngozi, however, had been silent but determined, waiting for the right moment to speak her mind. Kelechi, she finally said, breaking the silence. We can't keep running. This has to stop. Kelechi turned to her, his face weary. You think I don't know that? But these people. They have power, Ngozi. They've been getting away with this for years. What can we do against them? Ngozi placed her hand on his arm, her voice steady and firm. We need to involve the police, Kelechi. They have the resources and authority to stop your family's men. It's the only way to end this once and for all. Kelechi shook his head, his frustration boiling over. The police? Ngozi. Do you know how many of them are corrupt? What if they take bribes and turn against us? These people will find us before we can even explain our case. Ngozi stood, her eyes blazing with conviction. Not all of them are corrupt, Kelechi. We have to believe in something. You've been running for years, living in fear. Isn't it time to fight back? Isn't it time to reclaim your life? Her words hit Kelechi like a bolt of lightning. He sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands. I don't want to lose you, Ngozi. If this plan backfires. Ngozi knelt in front of him, taking his hands in hers. You won't lose me. I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. But we can't keep living like this. Trust me, Kelechi. We'll find honest officers, people who will listen and protect us. It's time to take control of our lives. Kelechi looked into her eyes, seeing the strength and determination that had drawn him to her in the first place. He nodded slowly. All right. Let's do it. The next day, Kelechi and Ngozi traveled to the nearest city to meet with a trusted police officer. Ngozi's father had once worked with one senior police officer, named Inspector Gabriel Okoro, of which they contacted him. Inspector Gabriel Okoro was a no-nonsense man with a reputation for integrity. When Kelechi and Ngozi told him their story, he listened intently, his expression growing darker with every detail. This is serious, Inspector Gabriel Okoro said, leaning back in his chair. If what you're saying is true, these men have committed multiple crimes, kidnapping, attempted murder, conspiracy, and more. We'll need solid evidence to build a case against them. Kelechi handed over the journal from the box, which contained details about his family's betrayal, bank statements showing their financial manipulations, and notes about their attempts to track him down. I've kept this for years, just in case I ever needed to prove the truth. Inspector Gabriel Okoro studied the documents, nodding. This is a good start. We'll also need to gather testimonies and possibly set up a sting operation to catch them in the act. But I'll make sure you're protected throughout this process. You're not alone anymore. Kelechi once again felt a glimmer of hope. Under Inspector Gabriel Okoro's guidance, a plan was set in motion. The police leaked false information about Kelechi's whereabouts, baiting his enemies into action. Sure enough, his relatives sent their men to finish the job. Ngozi and Kelechi stayed in a secure location, constantly monitored by police officers. Ngozi couldn't hide her nerves as the operation unfolded, but she held Kelechi's hand tightly, drawing strength from their bond. Do you think this will work? She asked him one night, as they sat in the safe house. Kelechi kissed her forehead. I don't know. But for the first time, I feel like we're not running anymore. We're standing up to them. The next morning, news came in. The police had intercepted the kidnappers on their way to the decoy location. Armed officers surrounded the group, arresting them on the spot. Under interrogation, the men revealed everything, including the involvement of Kelechi's relatives. A few days later, the police raided the family's estate. Kelechi's cousins and uncles were caught off guard. Their power and arrogance finally crumbling as they were handcuffed and taken away. Kelechi and Ngozi watched the news from their safe house. Tears streamed down Ngozi's face as the camera showed the men being led into police vehicles. It's over, she whispered. It's finally over. Kelechi wrapped his arms around her, his own emotions threatening to overwhelm him. I couldn't have done this without you, Ngozi. You gave me the courage to fight. The case went to trial, with the evidence Kelechi provided forming the foundation of the prosecution. The courtroom was packed as the charges were read out: conspiracy to commit murder, kidnapping, embezzlement, and more. Ngozi testified about the threats and attacks they had endured. Her voice steadied despite the painful memories. Kelechi's testimony was raw and powerful, painting a vivid picture of the betrayal and violence he had suffered. The judge handed down a decisive ruling. Some of Kelechi's relatives received life sentences, while others were sentenced to death for their heinous crimes. As they left the courthouse, free from the shadows that had haunted them for so long, Kelechi turned to Ngozi with tears in his eyes. "You saved me," he said. "You believed in me when I couldn't even believe in myself." Ngozi smiled, squeezing his hand. "We saved each other, Kelechi. Now it's time to build the life we deserve." They walked away from the courthouse hand in hand, ready to start a new chapter of life, one filled with hope, love, and the promise of a brighter future. Kelechi and Ngozi started a new life together. They bought a new house in the city, leaving a luxury life. Ngozi families came visiting often. Kelechi's wealth becomes a helping hand to others, ensuring that their blessings were shared. Ngozi had chosen love over status, only to discover that true wealth was in the bond they shared. The moral lesson from this story is that true love sees beyond appearances and material possessions. Sometimes, choosing kindness and faith can lead to blessings far greater than you ever imagined. Thanks for watching to the end, and please, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share for more inspiring African folktales.